Once you're ready to begin, once you're comfortable with what I'm asking you to do, I realize it is kind of a strange assignment. It's not really one essay, but it's actually 3 small mini essays, and they're not even full developed essays. They're more like little snapshot composite sketches of these places that you're writing about. So I've got a few notes for you here, and I thought I'd go through how to get started. So let me click over to my other slide here. There we go. Okay, so for this assignment, you are welcome to use the same place that you wrote about in the week 1 discussion board, but you don't have to. You can start over, do something new, or modify the place that you started with. If you started with something quite broad, you could narrow it down, or if you started with something that you feel like is too tiny of a location, you could widen it out. Usually though, the smaller the place, the easier it is to write about. I wrote about this in some of the discussion board posts, that if you picked a country, you're probably picking something that's too large to handle. It's a lot easier to focus, zoom in even further, not even a city, not even a whole town. Try to focus on one specific building, one room in one building, sometimes even smaller than that. I've had students write about one particular wall. Really, it is easier. I know it sounds odd, but the smaller the location, the easier it is to write about. So I'm asking you to do roughly the same thing you did in the first discussion board, just again, slightly bigger scale. We're looking for about a page of each of the 3 sections here, double spaced. I suggest you go back and view the responses that you got in the discussion board. I've responded to everyone now, I believe, so you've gotten some feedback from me. You probably have gotten feedback from other classmates too. For the first section, the formal section, the objective description, really for all 3 of them, you want to name the location here. You want to give it some kind of name that you can refer to it in each of the 3 mini pieces. You know, if it's got a name already, like a restaurant or Starbucks or a particular campsite, that's pretty easy. If it doesn't have a formal name, give it one. You know, use your last name and refer to it as the McMillan Clifton household, something like that. You don't want to refer to it as your house or my house, because again, that's subjective. So you want to be objective here, give it a name that anybody would recognize it as. For each section here, we're asking for, again, it's not a full essay, but it shouldn't be one big chunk of text. So go for 3 or more paragraphs as an ideal. A rough guide. You may find that it takes you a little bit more than that, paragraph-wise. Not looking for introductions or conclusions. Again, these aren't really full essays. They're just little mini sketches of the place. Zoom it in, get very specific. Start broad. Tell us where it is, name it again, where it's located, how we could get there in a very general sense. So if this is something that's located off of I-5, what exit is it? That sort of thing. Don't just pull up like Google Maps and spend the whole page giving us directions to the location. That won't do anybody any good. As you get further into the essay, tell us, you know, a bit about what we're going to see when we come up to this place. What are the dominant features of the place? Again, hit all the senses here: sight, smell, touch, taste, sound. Any one of those is going to work. We've used sight most, but use all of them. The third paragraph, further paragraphs, you know, the further you go, you can get more developed, more detail, take us further into this place. The more time you spend there, what are people going to notice? It's one way to do it. Or you can scroll down a little bit further here and see I've got some more suggestions for you. Some of you did this in the discussion board post last week. Instead of zooming us in, take us from one starting point around the perimeter of the room, you know, paragraph by paragraph. Even if this isn't a place that has a specific room, you can still do roughly the same thing. Set up boundaries, walk us along the boundaries in an organized fashion. You know, use paragraph breaks to show us when you've moved from one piece to the next in that. Again, no conclusion here, just end when it ends. For the personal description, this is the next section of the paper, you're probably going to follow roughly the same pattern. The details are probably going to be the same too. Again, the tone is what changes from one piece to the next. So, for instance, say you're describing a train station, and train stations always have clocks somewhere in them, very prominent clocks. Time's always a concern. So in the objective section, you probably want to tell us about that clock, how big it is, what time it currently reads, if you know about roughly how old the clock is, things like that. Because this is something that somebody's going to notice and be able to verify about that clock. But in the personal description, now you can say, okay, well, you still want to mention the clock because it's a dominant feature of that place, but now you can tell us about how that clock makes you feel. If you always feel like you're in a rush when you're coming there, the clock hands are going to remind you of how late you're running. Something along those lines. So, same details, different mood, different tone. The creative section is the one section that's new that you didn't do in the discussion boards last week, or most of you didn't anyway. And you have two options here, and you have to do one or the other. It's not optional, but you can pick which of those two that you choose to do. If you choose the short story option, you're not going to have time for the whole story probably, so you're looking at one particular scene. This time you're putting people into the location. The other two sections, people might be there, but they're not really the dominant force. This time in the story, it's all about the people, or the woodland creatures, or fairies, or space aliens, whatever. The place is just the backdrop to it. But you do want to make it a scene that can only happen in that one spot, or someplace very similar to it. You want it to be unique to that location, that there's a reason that we're talking about this story in this place. It should provide us some new sense of the place there. You can use some real life experience, or you can make something up completely, or you can blend something of the two, what you wish you had said to that person during the fight, or whatever. Doesn't matter to me, as long as it's a convincing story, as long as it's a new way of seeing the place. The other option that you have is the poem. And again, I'm looking at this as a poem about the place, again, to see the place in a different way, not necessarily as a beautiful piece of art, although it's welcome to be that as well. It can rhyme, it doesn't have to, it can be a prose poem, it can be a shape poem where you use the words to make a picture, whatever you want to do with that. But, pay special attention to your language here. This is probably going to be primarily subjective language, subjective description, but you get a lot more freedom to be creative with the ways that you're using the words and the tone that you create here. Going for mood, first and foremost. Poetry is all about mood. So, those are some things to keep in mind. Try out metaphors and similes. If you have any questions about any section or all three, feel free to email me at any point. A few notes about the whole piece of paper, or the whole project as a whole. Each section should be at least one full page long, double-spaced. Size 12 font is usually standard. That's for the final draft. For the rough draft, we're just looking for roughly half a page of each section. Something enough there to tell me that you've gotten started on each piece. They can be as developed as you want them, as long as you've gotten started on each one. For the rough draft that's due this week, I'm not going to be reading them for content. I am going to be opening each file and making sure that you've gotten started. And if you want to ask me specific questions about the content, please do so. But I'm not going to be giving specific comments back to everybody. I'm just going to be giving you 25 points if you've done it, no points if you haven't done it. Next week for the final draft, I am going to ask you to submit these in MLA heading styles, and I'll show you more about how to do that next week. Going back to the assignment page, on every full assignment I give you, I will give you a sense of my rubric for what you need to do to get an A, and we all want to know those things, right? So make sure you look at these rubrics, because I do use them to grade, so you should use them to prepare for turning in a project as well. And finally, also in the notes for this week, you've probably already noticed that there is a PowerPoint presentation about brainstorming, some pre-writing activities. I suggest you do that. Use it as it is helpful to you, and hopefully get you started on this project. It's usually kind of fun. It's different than probably other things you've done, but most people have a lot of fun with it, so I hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening.